Welcome to this edition of Captions. I'm Eartha Collier, your host. In celebration of Black History Month, the theme of tonight's show is Serving Humanity in the Spirit of the Dream. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a man who, like thousands of others, longed for human dignity and freedom. A man whose only weapon against evil and injustice was Christian love. It was this concept, his ideal, which inspired citizens everywhere to dignified, nonviolent social action. Dr. King believed that if his people accepted Christian love as the foundation, they would no longer lend their cooperation to an evil system, and they would no longer willingly accept their oppression, which in truth only served to give the oppressor a convenient justification for his acts. The seeds of nonviolent protest were deeply rooted in the love ethic in which Dr. King so firmly believed. By raising it to a new height, love was to become the potent instrument for social and collective transformation, exemplified for Dr. King by Gandhi of India. In Gandhi's words, no individual or group need submit to any wrong, nor need they use violence to right that wrong. There is always the way of nonviolent resistance. This is ultimately the way of the strong man.
That way, Gandhi's way, as Dr. King and the nation would soon learn, would be long and difficult. It was indeed the season of suffering. With Dr. King as their leader, blacks and some whites began their nonviolent crusade, attacking the cores of injustice, segregation. Students and civil rights workers from across the land walked together, sat together, and sang out against the inequalities suffered by blacks. And wherever they went, their peaceful actions were met with hostility, ridicule, and brutality. Despite the dogs, despite the bombs, despite the guns and bullets and bloodshed, despite the attempts to strip human dignity itself, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. urged his people to go on. His words, filled with hope and the dream of peace and brotherhood, rang out over the tears, over the wailings of human misery, and triumphantly over the jeers of the oppressor.
They were the words that incited even the most powerful to call Dr. King the conscience of the entire nation. But deep within his own conscience, for Dr. King, powerful oratory was more than mere words. To him, the civil rights movement was the Christian principle of love going beyond the pulpit. It was believing and believing in something that fervently meant standing up with it to the end of one's days.
And the kind of love that God has for us is the kind of love that we must have for all men. And so this morning, as I look into the eyes of each of you and look beyond this congregation to people all over the city and the nation and the world, I say I love you. I would rather die than hate you. Every now and then, I guess we all think realistically about that day when we will be victimized with what is life's final common denominator. That's something we call death. We all think about it, and every now and then I think about my own death, and I think about my own funeral, and I don't think of it in a morbid sense. Every now and then I ask myself, what is it that I would want said? I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. I want you to say that day that I tried to be right on the war question. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try to feed the hungry. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try in my life to clothe those who were naked. I want you to say on that day that I did try in my life to visit those who were in prison. I want you to say that I tried to love and serve humanity.
Even though Dr. King would never live to see his own dream fulfilled, he instructed us, his followers, to carry it out in our hearts, our minds, and our actions. And in so, the dream lives on in each of us.
all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. The rich man can never be what he ought to be until the poor man is what he ought to be.
And so, Dr. King instructed us to carry out his dream in our hearts, in our minds, and in our actions. Tonight on Captions, we are placing the spotlight on several individuals from the local community who have a history and reputation of doing just that. To my far right is Mr. Scott Gore, who is a teacher education student at Bradley University. He is also the coordinator for the after-school tutorial program at the public library here in Peoria. Dr. Barbara Penelton is the chairperson and is a professor of the teacher education department at Bradley University. And Mr. Ken Hinton is the administrator and principal at Valeska Hinton Early Childhood Education Center, and he has been a part-time instructor at Bradley University. Welcome to each of you.
Thank you.
When we first arrived at the studio, Dr. Penelton, you looked at Mr. Gore and you commented that you know Mr. Gore and you've seen him quite a bit in the past, and you've never seen him look so good. I'd like to say all of you look marvelous. Welcome to the show today. You have seen the documentary and you have heard Dr. King's speeches and messages in that documentary. And what I'd like to ask you is, which of those messages espoused by Dr. King appeal to you the most, and why?
I suspect that the part that is most popular, the I Have a Dream, because it engenders hope. It gives people a vision. It gives them hope that things will be better. It is a way of looking at the future and a way of helping us to establish a vision and a set of goals.
I think one of the things that Dr. King said, and I think it was in his last sermon, was when he talked about serving others. To me, I think that's the epitome of why we are human and some of the things that we do. If I might, I'd like just to read what he said here, because it's, to me, it means so much. He said, I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. And I think that says so much in terms of us as human beings, as in terms of us as being people. And it's just a very strong reflection of what the man stood for and what his life was about and the message he tried to give to this country and to the world. That's one of my favorite, if not the favorite, sermons of Dr. King.
Likewise, and I was also most impressed when Dr. King urged his people to go on despite all the things that they were going through, and when he specifically mentioned that part of the struggle would be incorporating an attitude which states to the oppressors that there were some things worth fighting for, that there were some things worth dying for even, and whenever they felt that they were to a point where they wanted to give up, he wanted to remind them to continue to struggle and keep up with their mindset that some things were worth dying for. And in fact, his commitment to the fight was so sincere that he ended up sacrificing his life for that purpose, for humanity.
Okay, and that is the theme for tonight's show, serving humanity in the spirit of the dream. And I know that all of you, and now that I've had a chance to talk with you and to talk with other people about you, I know that you're not the type of people who seek recognition or awards and rewards for the things that you do to serve humanity. But I'd like to highlight some of the things that I've heard about each of you, because this is the theme of the show, serving humanity in the spirit of the dream. And I can't tell you just how emotional I became as I talked to people who are around you in your lives, who gave me some information about you. I'll start with you, Scott. I spoke with a former teacher of yours, Mrs. Larice Joseph, and she became tearful when I called her and talked with her and told her that you would appear on the show and what the show was about. And and this is not an over-dramatization, she gasped for her breath and she said, "Oh my God." She said, "You have selected the cream of the crop for that particular show." And she said, "I can't find the words to explain what a wonderful person Scott Gore really is." She said, quote, "Scott is God's messenger of humanity." She described you as inexhaustible, relentless in your efforts to serve humanity. And the thing that she admired a lot about you is that you are a young person. She said, from an economic standpoint, you may not have arrived yet, but that never stops you from doing and giving of yourself.
Certainly. Well, first of all, let me say thank you to Ms. Joseph for those very kind words. I find it quite humbling, actually, even to be in the presence of two people that I respect so much and who have accomplished so many things. And in comparison, I haven't done anything outstanding, I don't believe, but I have just done things that I felt would help mankind, and particularly with young children. I have been able to, one of the mindsets that I grew up with was that if a person were able to become a mentor, a person needed a mentor in order to become a good mentor. And throughout my early experiences in education, I did not have a mentor until somebody that looked like me, until fortunately Mr. Ken Hinton came to Harrison School, where I attended, and he was always the person that I looked up to, and he always portrayed such sense of power and such intellect and such manliness that I always wanted to become a part of, you know. And Maya Angelou recently mentioned that back some time ago when she was growing up in the South, that she thought of white people that when she touched them, her hand would go through them. That's how surreal they were to her. And pretty much that was the same way it was for me when Harrison School was blessed with Mr. Hinton, because in my days of early education, there was never anyone there that looked like me who I could look up to until he came. And whenever I saw other black males in positions of leadership, I realized what an impact it had on me, and that was what made me want to have that same type of impact on other young people.
Is that what motivated you to pursue education?
Definitely,
as a
definitely. Some of the fine educators that I had at Harrison School, which made me believe in myself, and I wanted to have that, to give that in return, the same type of impact on young people.
Okay. And you are the youngest of 15 children in your family.
Right.
Is that right?
It's exactly.
And up until last year, I understand that you lived in one of the local projects here in Peoria, and you moved, and you took your mother with you.
Right, right. Having grown up in the Harrison home, my mother, let me just say, is a great lady. She's a terrific woman, and brought us up in the Harrison homes, which was in itself a challenge, but doing it alone kind of compounded the challenge for her. And she was able to allow us to go outside of our home without necessarily becoming a part of what was around us. And I think that was very important in my foundation in the Harrison homes. And as I grew up and became when I attempted to become a role model for some of the people in the Harrison homes, I've had some of the mothers that live there ask me about tutoring their children and that sort of thing. And so I opened up my door to allow them to come in and help them with their homework after school. I had one young man who came in on a regular basis and got tutoring in the Harrison. But it's just small things like that that I feel that we all need to do to help in ways that we can.
And I think that is so important. And the reason I brought that up is because oftentimes people who live, particularly young people who live in the projects, often think that there is not much hope for them beyond some of the limitations that they have to live under. And you are an example that you can, if you have a dream and if you have a mission, that you can succeed beyond your limitations, and you can overcome those limitations and succeed in spite of them. And another reason I pointed that out as well is because oftentimes in the community at large, there is somewhat of a stereotype that, quote, good, unquote, people don't live in the projects. And so I'd like to dispel that myth, because there are good people in the projects, and there are people in the projects who are doing good things. So I think that that's a point that needs to be made. And I did not know when I started out on this project to do this show on serving humanity in the spirit of the dream, that there was a sense of connectedness between all of you. And that was a coincidence. I did not know that. And for a good while, all of you didn't know who would be guests on the show until sort of the last minute. And so I didn't know that there was that connectedness between all of you. And you mentioned Mr. Hinton's role at Harrison School. And I'd like to focus on that somewhat, because as I was talking with Mrs. Joseph about Scott, and she discovered through our conversation that you would also be a guest, she started gasping for air again, and she said, "Oh my God, Ken Hinton, that's my brother. That is my brother." And for a while, I thought she really meant from a biological standpoint, because she was so strong in asserting that you are, in fact, her brother. And she talked about how much she cares about you as a person and what kind of person you were. She said at the time she was a teacher at Harrison School, that you were then a vice principal and then eventually became principal of that particular school. And she also described you as relentless and untiring and inexhaustible in your efforts to work with children and to care for the children you worked with at that school. And she talked about evenings when she would leave at 7 o'clock sometimes in the evening, and she would leave you there attending to the needs of a child or some children. She said that there were times when she witnessed you with needle and thread in hand sewing buttons on jackets of children. She saw you washing the face of a child or washing something out of a child's hair. And she had a conversation with you about those kinds of things at one point. And she said you indicated something to this effect, Mrs. Joseph, children learn better when they are clean. Children learn better when they feel loved. And that's pretty powerful, Ken.
Well, just as Scott has said, I feel very humble. Miss Joseph herself is just a dynamic and wonderful individual. My philosophy on life is one that we all are brothers and sisters, and we are put upon this planet to serve and to help each other. The children that I am so blessed to work with, and families, on a daily basis, is an opportunity for me to give back to what was given to me as a child. I am only giving back, or trying to give back, what I saw as a child. Scott mentioned his mother. It was my mother who was the impacting person in my life. And when we were very small children and we were very poor, we did not have anything, but we always were taught to give, to share, and to serve. And then when Dr. King came along, who was so far out there in terms of trying to reach a goal that seemed just pretty near impossible with the means of nonviolence, it was the epitome of in materializing what I was taught as a young child: never to hate, always to love, always to serve, and to be as spiritual about life as you could be. And the children that I have worked with, and like I say, I've been blessed to work with, it's just an opportunity to serve and to give to them what was given to me. You mentioned about the people that are in the projects. A lot of time our society has given to the world that if you are a certain social economic status or a certain ethnicity, there's a negative aspect of it, and that is not true. My greatest joys in life have been learning and growing and working with all people, and to dispel that stereotypical view that is given of people because of a social, economic, or a diversity issue. And Dr. King, he spoke it, he lived it, and he died for it. And there are very few people that are in my that I could say that I would really hold as a mentor, as someone that is just out there, and Dr. King would be one of them. Another thing that I would like to address too, growing up in Peoria, is that Peoria has been very blessed and very, very fortunate to have some wonderful people that that as a young boy I saw doing things in the community. And they were doing things in the community not because they were receiving money, but because there was an intrinsic good that was involved in it. Dr. Penelton does not remember this, or maybe may not make note of this, but when she received her doctorate degree, that was very important to many of us, especially for those of us who are going into education and we're in education, because of the fact that it said something to us that here's another realization that it can take place. Mr. Peoples, Mr. Campbell, Frank Campbell, Terry, Valeska Hinton, there are just a number of people that displayed the love and the commitment and dedication to a community that many of us feel that we owe it to society, we owe it. And the other side of that is that if I profess to be a Christian and I say that the golden rule is important, then it becomes a necessity that I do that. I was taught to do one day at a time, and I live this, and I tell my students this, that I got to be prepared. If this is my day, and tomorrow I stand before my Maker, I want to say I did all I could to serve and to exhibit the love that we are taught as Christians.
If you do nothing else anymore, I think that could already be said about you, considering all of the things that I have heard about your service in the community and the community at large. And I've seen you with the children. I'm a Valeska Hinton parent. I take my child there and I drop her off every day. And I can truly say on a personal note that when I leave that school, I feel very content because I know and I feel strongly that she's in good hands, primarily because you are there. There are other good people there as well, but you're there. And that feels very good to me to know that you're there and that she's in good hands. And the things that I hear her say about you, I can remember once when we switched roles at home and we decided to be the students, my husband and I decided to be the students, and she was to be the instructor or the teacher in the class. And we started misbehaving on purpose just to get a reaction from her to see how she would handle it. And she knows that you are about the right thing because she chastised us and she told us, and she's only 5 years old, and she said, listen, you guys, if you don't stop that, she said, you're going to have to talk to Mr. Hinton about it. So she felt that you were about the right thing, because if you're not about the right thing, or if you're not doing the right thing, or not behaving appropriately, then you need to talk to Mr. Hinton about that.
Well.
And when she said that, she didn't say that in a way that appeared to me that it was a threatening kind of thing. It's just that if you're not going to behave appropriately, you need to talk to Mr. Hinton about that. You know, I got the sense that she felt that you would want an explanation for what was happening, and that you had a desire for the children to behave properly, to learn, and that type of thing. But I just wanted to share that on a personal note. But I have seen you with the children. Many parents have talked with me about how wonderful you are with their children and what an impact you have on their lives as parents as well in your role as administrator at Valeska Hinton Early Childhood Education Center. You have almost answered everything that I wondered about you, but I want to go back to something. It's maybe somewhat of a sensitive area for you, because I know that several months ago your mother died. Mm-hmm. And at her funeral, a lot of the things that were said in Dr. King's documentary about what he would want people to be able to say about him at his funeral were actually said at your mother's funeral. And you indicated that your mother taught you certain things about serving humanity. Could you speak a little bit about your upbringing and what your mother taught you?
We learn most by seeing it actually happen and take place. You can stand up in front of someone and you can tell them how to do it or how it should be done, or else you can try to teach or display a concept by just talking about it. But when you see it happen on a daily basis, it becomes real and it embodies itself into you. When we were growing up in Peoria, our door at our home was never locked. Our refrigerator was always open to the entire neighborhood community. And my mother said if you were hungry and you did not have anything to eat, you could come to our house. When people would come in from out of town and no place to stay, they could stay with us. And we were just there to help. I remember when our clothes became too small for us, they were shared with other people, or we in turn would share their clothing. And it was a realization of how life, at least as far as I'm concerned, how it should be in terms of loving each other. There's a great joy in that. You talk about the children coming to me, but I in turn receive a lot out of that because of the fact it's what's important. And I think only a few of us who've had, it's not an opportunity, but for those of us who have come close to death and know that death is just at a moment's time away, you realize what is important. It's not the materialistic things in life, but it's the very small things in life that give life its meaning. A hug, you look great today, I love you, I'll miss you, those kinds of things. And those are the kinds of things that that I was raised with. It was never if I did something wrong. And I got into a discussion with this with one of my friends, and I think it's a good example of love. To me, it is. And she was telling me, she said, "Do you think that's right?" And I'll give you an example of what I said to her for her to ask that question. She said, I said, when we were children, no matter what I did as a child, and I was a very active child, I could never do anything that was that wrong that my mother would not love me. There were some things that would really make you want to question, what is this kid doing? And she asked me, she said, is that right? Is that why you guys are the way you are? Because there were about maybe 10 or 15 of us, and we all had the same mothers, because all of our mothers were pretty much consistent in loving us. And I think that type of love looks at an individual, this is what you did today, this is not the way you're going to be the rest of your life. And when you learn to share and to partake of life in that form, it makes life so much more meaningful when you realize that in the course of the day you work, you make money, but the money, you'd like to have it for yourself, but you give it to someone else, or you share, you give it to kids and so on, and there's a greater joy in that. And Dr. King did that in everything he did, and my mom, he embodied all the things that she taught us. And so I try to live one day at a time, to do the best I can.
Wow. Okay. When we return, we will talk some more with our guests regarding serving humanity in the spirit of the dream. We'll be right back after this public service announcement. We're back for more captions. Our theme tonight is Serving Humanity in the Spirit of the Dream, and our guests are Mr. Scott Moore, Dr. Barbara Penelton, and Mr. Ken Hinton. When we went to break, Ken, we were talking about your service to humanity, and we talked about things that you've done in your role as an educator here in Peoria, and we've talked about things that people have had to say about your role as an educator. We've talked about the role that you said your mother played in rearing you to be a kind, loving, giving person. I got the real scoop on you from a person who probably knows you best. I talk with Rita.
A person who knows you best.
Your wife. And she too was very emotional while talking about you as a person. And she said, I tell you, sometimes I stand in awe of him. She said, all of the things that you said you heard about him, I want you to know that he walks the talk, that you literally live the things that you believe in, that you live that way. And she said, not only is it in the community, and not only is it in society that you're that way, she said, you're that way behind closed doors at home as well. And it was very meaningful to her that you would be here today for this particular show. She said you are a wonderful husband to her, and that you are a wonderful, giving, loving parent to your children. And so what I get from that is that you are passing it on just as you got it from your mother. You're passing it on in your role as parent to your children and generations yet to be born. I got you that time.
You sure did.
She said it's hard to surprise you with anything.
You sure
in
did.
your family.
You did, because we went to the library yesterday and we were researching, because I was trying to find the quote I was telling you about, and I never told her that I was doing this because I tried to do things, very quietly. Mm-hmm. But we're trying to do all we can to see to it that our children and other people that we come into contact with are, receive what I feel to be the greatest joy out of life, and that is exhibiting love and sharing and serving others. And to me, that's, it might sound like a lot of, good things to say, but that's all I can remember. That's what's important. That's what is important to me. It brings me joy, and that's what I feel life is about.
Okay. That takes me to Dr. Penelton. You mentioned Dr. Penelton, Mr. Hinton, and what a role model she was for you, and what an inspiration she was for you. And I have to say right out of the gate that I can relate to that personally, because I don't know if she's aware of how much she played a role in my coming to Peoria. I've only been in Peoria for about 2 years, and she lured me here to work at Bradley. And she was so kind and so loving and so giving of herself when I came here for my job interview. She did things that she didn't have to do. She gave of her time. She took me out to lunch. She nurtured me the whole time. I was here for about 3 or 4 days for that interview, and she nurtured me as if I was a daughter of hers during that interview period. And I went back home, and I couldn't help but just talk about this wonderful person I met when I came for my interview, and the thoughtful things that she did. And I thought, if the rest of Peoria was like Dr. Penelton, then that's the place to be. And so in her own way, she lured me here with her kindness and her generosity. And Scott mentioned that she has been such an inspiration to him as well. And I talked with a friend of yours, Mr. Frank Campbell, who lured you here. Who lured me here about 27 years ago.
Well, more than that, really, because I came in '66.
Oh gosh, when I was in first grade, we came to Peoria. And so almost 30 years, in essence. And when I called him, immediately he said, I know a lot of good people in Peoria, and he gave me permission to quote him on this. He said, never in my life have I ever met anyone as loving and as caring as Barbara.
You said that we were connected, and we really, I don't know whether it has to do with the size of the town or what, but we are connected. The person that I met when I first came to Peoria was Valeska Hinton. She was the only female on the board of directors of the Urban League, and I was invited to take a position there. Terry found me an apartment. Terry was my first friend. Terry was the person who helped me to negotiate.
Terry meaning Valeska?
Yes, Valeska
Okay.
Hinton. And she was on the board of the Urban League, and Frank invited me, and he and I established a good friendship. He and Gloria and I established a good friendship, and Valeska. And so Peoria has been good to me. It was a place that I came that I didn't intend to stay. I came for a minute.
I heard that story.
And I stayed for an hour. So I think that there is a theme here, and the theme is that people who receive blessings try to give them back. People who are warmly received can extend that reception to other people. And there is that fundamental message there. I hear people saying, good things were done with me, good things were done for me, and it made it easy for me to do good things to other people. And I think that that's a fundamental theory, that those kind of warm interactions inspire you to do things that are similar to those, to the wonderful treatment.
You know what Frank said? Frank said, you know, I think sometimes that Barbara's in the wrong business. He said, because honestly, I think that she sometimes just goes out looking for anybody she can find who's in need to provide some service or to be of some service.
You see, the education business is the right business for
That's,
that.
I was getting ready to say, I beg to differ with Mr. Campbell
right business.
on that, because it is the right business, because who do we need in education to work with young people and to train the people who will work with young people than good, caring, loving, giving people? Because, I mean, that is, to me, one of the best roles to be in, to be a role model for others and to train others in the right way.
I teach because of a teacher. I frequently say that I had a 4th grade teacher named Aline Marks. And Aline Marks was an outstanding educator. And one day she said to me, I think you would be a good teacher. And I was convinced that without a doubt, if she thought I could be a good teacher, then I could be a good teacher.
There goes that message again.
Yes.
that was indicated by Scott. The role of mentoring and the importance of mentoring for other people, and how you were inspired by your mentors, and in turn you're mentoring other people. I also heard about how you have over the years done what Ken said his mother would do. Open your house to whoever needs a place to stay, a meal to eat, whatever. And people who know you well have said that there's hardly been a time since you've been in Peoria that someone wasn't living at your house. As we speak, someone is living at your house. I heard that you would take people in who you thought had potential to do things, and you would provide for them a temporary place to stay, and they would get more than shelter and a meal to eat. They would get encouragement and positive reinforcement. And I think that's quite a big undertaking, and I have to say that I really do admire that a lot. Because I'll tell you, if someone stays at my house for longer than 2 weeks, it really, really becomes a challenge. And to think that you have done this off and on throughout the years, off and on for almost 30 years since you've been here. I understand you came here to Peoria with 2 children as a single parent.
Yes.
And even as you reared your 2 young children, you took in other people, other young people, and in essence, to some extent, reared the children of other people.
Well, there's a motto down at the Hinton Center, and it is the African proverb, it takes a village. And I'm part of the village. And I believe in the motto, and I'm part of the village. Most of the people who have been in and out of my house have either been students at Bradley or relatives and relatives' children. But like Ken has said, you not only give to them, but they bring something to you. They bring their youth and their vitality to you. And so it's not one-sided. It's mutual. Not only does it work out for them, but it works out a whole lot for me to have bright young children who are growing and developing and becoming who they can become. And that's awfully rewarding, awfully rewarding.
Well, last year you had a teenage girl or a young lady.
Shataka.
Yes. And this year you have a teenage boy.
A 14-year-old.
A 14-year-old.
Right, Wendell.
Wendell.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I talked with a very dear girlfriend of yours who asked me how much time did I have, because there was just so much to say about you. She said that she recently relocated here from New Mexico.
Oh, yeah, Joni.
Yes. And that when she talked with you and indicated that she wanted to relocate here, that you called her back and said, everything's set. You found her an apartment. She's physically challenged. And so you made sure that there were accommodations there for her disability. And she said, you have just done so many wonderful things, that she's known you since she was 14 years old.
Yeah, we were friends
and
as
that
kids.
you were like that from childhood. And she said the things that you do, she goes to church with you. She dines with you on Sundays after church at your house.
Well, Joni and I were friends since we were kids. I mean, we were best friends, not just occasional acquaintances. We were best friends. And so when there was the opportunity for her to come this way, I was excited. I mean, there's nothing any better than having a good girlfriend. And to have her back in town was wonderful. So I was real excited about getting my girlfriend back here.
And she said that you really are like sisters, and in many aspects closer than many biological sisters are.
Yeah, we are. My mother was in town recently, and Mother said, well now, since Joni doesn't have parents, I'm adopting Joni, so we are sisters.
Well, you once told me, when you don't have biological sisters, you make some.
You make some, that's right. That's right, you take them on.
You mentioned your mother. I talked to your mother. Got you too. I talked with your mother, who gave me some lowdown about you.
But I don't think this is fair.
Or
even legal.
I talked with your mother about you even before I knew that I would be doing this show. It had nothing to do with this show. Last year, I stopped by your house, and you were not at home. So I stayed for a while, and we gossiped about you. And you never knew it.
When your friend and your mother do that, you're in bad trouble.
But it was good gossip. I talked with her about many of the wonderful things that you had done for me, and the way that you had been so supportive of me and helping me to make the adjustment here. Took me on a tour to look for housing and all kinds of things. She said, you know, Barbara has been that way ever since she was a little girl. She was always, he said, as long as she can remember, you were always doing things to help other people. And she talked about a time when you sent some people to her house who she did not know. And they said, Barbara told us to come here and that you would feed us and give us a place to stay.
And she did.
And I asked her what happened. I said, well, what happened to them? Did they stay? And she said, well, yes, they did. And so there's a common theme running between all of you, this kindness generating from your parents and going down from your parents through to other people you touch, the lives of other people you touch. And I get from all three of you a sense of spiritual connectedness as well. You mentioned it about the blessings. Ken referred to it indirectly. How do you feel about being spiritually connected? What role does that play in your life?
The spiritual connectedness has always played a major role in my life because there has been so many phenomenal things that has happened in my life, be it happening directly to me or otherwise. And many of those things that have occurred, I have no conception of. My intelligence does not allow me to understand it. And so I attribute many of those things to a supreme being and one guidance that could not be controlled by myself. Certainly that I could not take care of myself. And there are so many things that I feel that if all of us were able to humble ourselves enough and be in connection with a greater power and a greater messenger, then we would be able to follow a path that would not deviate very much from that path that Dr. King himself followed. One of the things that we know about him was that he had a very deep spiritual conviction, and it was his force was so phenomenal that the people that he were fighting against, so to speak, could not understand how they could inflict so much physical pain on he and his people without them retaliating physically. What they failed to realize was that it was the spiritual power,
Christian love.
And Christian love, exactly, that made them so proud, that made them so able to continue up with their fight. And the physical will wear out a lot quicker than the spiritual. And so if the spiritual is lacking, then the physical really has no real purpose, you know.
If you could, each of you, identify one legacy that you would like to leave to your family, your children, to individuals in society at large, what would that be? What legacy would you like to leave?
I'd like to say be a caretaker.
Be a caretaker.
Be a caretaker. And do it on an individual level. We live in a society where generosity is often impersonal. Do it as an individual and direct it to individuals. Be a caretaker.
I probably would say, if I could leave to my children and community, is what we said at the opening of the program, and that is to love everyone and to serve.
And I would have to say that I would want people to always know and try to be all that they can be. And Mr. Hinton mentioned earlier the golden rule of thumb, and that was introduced to me by, as a matter of fact, Ms. Joseph, and she had it on her door, to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I think if most of us tried to do that, we will find that this world would be a lot more amicable to us.
Okay. And people described you all as being, they use similar terminology in describing each of you: untiring, inexhaustible, relentless in your efforts to serve other people. The question that I'd like to ask is that oftentimes when you spend so much time giving of yourself to other people, and when you do that relentlessly, it causes me to wonder, how is it that you get your own needs met?
They're met in the process. The process is the reward.
Definitely.
They're met in the process.
Right. When you mentioned earlier the connectedness amongst us, I think, as she hinted at, education being that thing, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to be in the pre-service program, teacher pre-service program at Bradley, and my job allows me to be able to work with young people, and as Mr. Hinton mentioned earlier, is self-rewarding to be able to help and have them return that to you.
Thank you. Captions will be right back.
A million Americans going where they're needed.
Morning, Jim.
To get things done. The Senior Corps. There's a lot that needs to get done in this country. And if you're over 55, you can help do it through national service. Put your lifetime of experience to work. The Senior Corps.
I've had
the same friends since I was a little kid. But this year, some of them started playing with these other kids. I guess there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's cool making new friends and all, but they weren't like us. They were, different. And I heard my big brother saying some pretty bad stuff about people like them. But they seemed pretty cool, and we had a pretty good time. So, maybe my brother doesn't know everything.
Hey, Carlos, come on, we need you.
Don't be afraid.
Be your friend.
Just before the airing of this show, I was notified that Mrs. Larice Joseph stopped by the studio to leave a gift of chocolates for all of us, including each of the guests for tonight's show, Mr. Scott Gore, Dr. Barbara Penelton, and Mr. Kenneth Hinton. And she had this to say. She left a note as well, and she had this to say about the guests who are appearing on the show tonight. To say I'm proud would be the understatement of the year. So richly deserved, so sorely needed, so timely for today's chaos. God's blessings, Miss Joseph. And I couldn't say it better. It truly is a blessing to have been here in your presence tonight. I have been in very good company. Thank you so much for coming to the show and being a guest on Captions.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, and please join us next week, same time, for another edition of Captions.
When we are freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.